So basically, why is death so important? I mean, obviously everyone dies, just as everyone is born. I mean, so what? But why is death such an important subject within religion? Why is each and every single religion, or at least most religions to the best of my knowledge, saturated with the ideas of death? Whether it's dying of natural causes, being crucified, being killed, bleeding to death, being shot by arrows. I mean, we can't deny that religion is one of the most powerful cultural forces on the face of the planet. And yet, it is full of death. Some people might even say that religions are in fact death cults, because of this obsession with the idea of death. It's one of the tarot cards. It's contained in nearly every single form of theology that we've got. So what does it actually mean? Obviously there's literalist theology, which says that we should see this in a very literal sense, as being just dying, someone being killed. But is that like the be-all and the end-all of the subject of death in religion and mysticism? Certainly not. The way I understand it, religion deals with people who are alive. It deals with the way that they think, with the way that they behave, and how they conduct themselves in their day-to-day lives. So you might think that death itself is a pretty silly idea. Why on earth would you dwell upon it? When I was a kid in school, we had this thing called RE, which is religious education, and my RE teacher tried to inform us about the idea of death as being allegorical. And I couldn't understand that then, because I had been in Sunday schools where we were told about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ being a literal event, and his resurrection being, of course, a literal event. So for me to try and incorporate the idea of a mystical or allegorical concept of death into my life was damn near impossible. It wasn't until later in life that I started to experience and understand what change really meant. And therefore, by inference, what my RE teacher could have been trying to explain, it wasn't just simple changes such as moving from one school to another, or moving from being someone who is a student to being someone who is in the world of work, or moving from one job to another. This was something slightly more profound, something deeper, and therefore somehow spiritual. I came to realize that there were two different forms of allegorical death, so to speak. One of them was brought about through changes outside of your control, such as growing up, reaching puberty, leaving puberty and becoming an adult. And some of those were in your control, such as changing your style of life, changing a few habits, giving something up, or adopting new habits. But within the realm of changes that you could control, there was another one, which was somehow deeper, namely it deals with the way that you think, and the way that you feel, the way that you understand your emotions and learn to control them, or to try and shift them and get rid of some undesirable traits. Let's take the example of guilt, and let's say you wanted to remove guilt. Not necessarily to live life without the emotion entirely, which would in fact be incredibly unhealthy and very antisocial. But what if you had a particular guilt issue associated with a particular time in your life when you'd done something that was wrong, and the guilt was still weighing very heavily upon you, and as a direct result of that was not necessarily doing you any good? Could you somehow employ religious means and the concept of death to get rid of it? To a certain degree, I envy people who are in religions that have the death concept as being very predominant within them, because these people are exposed to this idea on a regular basis, and as such would probably find it a little easier to draw the connection or the correlation between their needed personal change and dealing with, let's say, an emotion of guilt going back to when they were younger, than someone who does not necessarily have that particular culture around. Now, I personally am not someone who is heavily engrossed in any one particular religion at this present point in time. I just am not. And as a result of that, I have to steal from wherever I can in order to try and get the results that I'm after. Now, I'm not a Christian, and I don't identify with the Christian faith, but I am aware that there is a way of using ideas which are present in every form of religiosity that could be useful to an individual when reaching some form of personal crisis. These born-again Christians are a key example. They go through the process of extreme cultural indoctrination so that they can reach a level of belief and acceptance that each and every single one of their guilt or misfortunes have somehow been washed away by the death of some poor innocent individual about 2,000 years ago. Let's hypothetically consider that they are actually onto something. What they themselves are onto, I don't think that they fully understand. But I feel that we can employ some ideas from the crucifixion of Christ, just as we could employ some ideas about the death and resurrection of the sun god in paganism, to very specific instances in our lives. But just for convenience's sake, and because, I'm living in a Christian country, just as you probably are if you're in the United States of America, let's use the example of Christianity and the example of Jesus Christ being killed. Now, you don't have to believe in Jesus Christ, you don't have to care for Jesus Christ, but think about this as a part of your being that has chosen to go forward and be killed so that you can have relief and release from some variety of emotional turmoil that you may be going through or you may be suffering from in the here and now. I suppose it's because of this image of God as being a shepherd that I don't feel comfortable with certain theistic ideas, because a shepherd rears the sheep purely for the purposes of killing them. But anyway, let's consider this example of Jesus Christ one more time. Think carefully about that moment when you had the instance of some action that you feel very guilty about, and identify in your mind's eye that instance and that action with the individual going to be crucified or killed. Now, this could be a pagan deity, this could be Jesus Christ, this could be Odin, or whatever. Think about it very carefully. Hold it in your mind's eye. Imagine yourself being that person, walking the cobbled streets with a big weight on your back, being jeered at by the crowds, being hated by everyone around you. Think about the long, arduous journey, the pain in your back, the pain in your leg muscles, your arms, your neck, your entire being aching, dripping with blood. But as you're doing this, identify that it is not you who is suffering, but the pain within you which is suffering. Carry on with this meditation and take it to its logical conclusion. The moment when this being, which represents something which has chosen to die so that you can live on without it, or with it in a changed form, being taken to the place of execution. Feel the pain of the preparations for the execution itself, whether it's nails being rammed through your hands and feet, a sword in your thigh, or being pierced with arrows, whichever one is most applicable to your own mythology, or the mythology which you have chosen to steal. Immerse your mind in the pain and the agony. Feel the cold wind on your flesh. Feel how isolated and lonely that man feels. And then be with him in your mind's eye as you watch this character die in the most excruciating manner possible. And as you do so, feel that guilt, fear, pain, anger, anxiety, whatever it is, dying. Now, if you were to do this in a state of meditation, a very deep state of meditation, possibly a state of hypnosis, you may feel a little lightheaded afterwards. You may feel a little more relaxed or philosophical. You may feel that symbolically you have removed something from you, but of course the work doesn't end there. You've got to carry on working upon yourself, going through self-development and growth to make sure that that negativity, whatever it was, does not come back and try and return you to the state that you were in prior to that, execution or crucifixion moment. You may feel a sense of change inside yourself, a feeling of relief from the weight on your back, so to speak. A sense of undoing some variety of damage which was done to yourself many years ago, and an opportunity to do without the old you, so to speak, which you have symbolically crucified when you went through that meditation and contemplation. Now, when I was doing that video on the subject of hypnosis, I found it interesting that some people felt that suggestion could in fact be to wake you up more or to become more alert rather than necessarily to relax you and subdue you. And I do question whether these people who are going to church every Sunday or twice a week or whenever it is, are in fact submitting themselves to a form of hypnosis whereby they are taking a suggestion in their awakened state of mind akin to the one which I have just described to you, to enable them to attempt to overcome something else which is within them. And maybe due to the monomania or obsession that people might have with their religion, they assume that it's all down to the supernatural being, rather than a sense of ideas being permitted into their mind to be able to change their perceptions and understanding of themselves. I suppose that if people were to do this on a sufficiently regular basis, they may feel such a sense of relief and lightheadedness that they may be tempted to go out and evangelize. So maybe there is a dark aspect to this in the fact it can create more obsessions. Once you've removed the obsession of the negative, it may put in an obsession which may create negativity in other people. But I'd still recommend the possibility of considering this death subject quite seriously, because you can still use it. I don't care if you're religious or if you're atheist. I don't care if you're spiritual. I don't care if you're pagan or druid or Wiccan or Hindu or Sikh. This concept is probably somewhere in your history or in your holy books in some way or another. Maybe the festival of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur has a similar meaning, a moment of atonement, bringing yourself at one to God. But are you necessarily bringing yourself at one to God? Or are you just stage by stage eroding some forms of accumulated psychological and emotional baggage? I think it would make more logical and rational sense to assume that this is talking about psychological change, which you are deliberately placing upon yourself and working at the deepest levels of your own mind, rather than necessarily talking about literal death, or indeed something as simple as changing your job or leaving school. Psychologically and allegorically and emotionally, it is still death. That is why I feel death in religion is such an important subject, rather than just a lugubrious one. This has been the great and glorious, soon to be famous one day, Nick Dutch, signing out for now.